Welcome to Choosing a Hosting Provider. My name is Duncan and I'm the technical architect for a professional food blog called Lazy Cat Kitchen, and I'm also the lead developer for a WordPress store called Lazy Cat Themes, who sell recipe and lifestyle themes for WordPress bloggers. So, web hosting. How are you going to host your blog and whom are you going to get to host it? I've worked in IT for 18 years as a professional, and looking into this subject literally made my eyes glaze over and roll back in my head. There are so many options. So today, I'm going to decode 500 advertising spills and try and make sense of the mysterious world of blogger web hosting. In this two-part video series, I'm going to explain what a server is, explain the 4 different types of web hosting, including the subtypes, and talk you through the Lazy Cat Themes 3 golden rules of choosing a web hosting provider. So, what exactly is a server? Just bear in mind that in my IT career, this has never been my direct job. There has always been some bearded chap, often called the Dungeon Master, who does all of this. So I'm going to mangle the terminology here. But what you see on the screen is basically a server rack. Each one of those things is a server, a type called a blade server. Just think of a knife in a knife block. Now the first type of server you use to run your blog is called a dedicated server. And for that, you get the whole blade. But it doesn't come cheap. Here is what it will cost you a month on some of the common hosting providers. You have to be a pretty big blog to go with the dedicated server option. I personally, no matter how big we got, would never use this option. If that server dies, you can have an outage of hours. I want to host with something more modern with some redundancy, which is explained later. You can do everything that a dedicated server does with a VPS, which is explained in part 2. The only reason I discuss the dedicated server now is that some of the other types of server hosting are easier to visualize because they are fractions of a dedicated server. Which brings us to the first option that most blogs start off with. Shared hosting. When companies offer you $3.95 per month hosting, generally speaking what you are getting is shared hosting. If you imagine that a dedicated server is a large apartment block, you are basically getting a chance to rent one of the smaller flats. What is never clear about shared hosting is exactly what type of server you are on, how many people you are sharing with, and how much CPU or RAM that server has. If you look at this Bluehost plan, you get standard performance until you get to $13.95 a month, and then you get high performance. That's a bit woolly for me. I'd like to know what I'm paying for. You can be clever and kind of extrapolate how much you're probably getting. If it costs about $150 for a whole server, your $8 a month is probably getting you around 1/18th of a server. But with the overhead required for splitting a server up, a good ballpark figure would be 1/20th of a server. But this is totally a shot in the dark estimate. All of this stuff is hidden from you. So what are the pros of the shared server? The immediate one is cost. It is the cheapest option, which is why so many people start at this point. The other one is that it requires minimal technical knowledge. You generally just need to install WordPress and start creating your blog. So what are the cons? Firstly, you have no visibility of anything. So if your website starts going slowly, you can't do anything except complain to the hosting provider and hope they'll do something. Sometimes it takes them 24 hours even to respond to your call. Secondly, you are sharing a server with a lot of people. Only one of them needs to do something crazy or irresponsible and your blog will slow down as a result. And lastly, if you need to install something extra for a WordPress plugin, you may not be allowed to. A server shared by 20 people will be locked down from most changes. This may mean you have to limit your blog functionality. Okay, so some of this stuff sounds not ideal. What is the next option up? The next option up is cloud hosting. Cloud hosting is the same as shared hosting, except that instead of splitting up a single server, you are sharing resources from a cloud of computers. To be honest, cloud hosting options differ, so there's no real way of knowing exactly what it is that you're getting. This option has the following pros. Firstly, you are not just on one server, you are sharing from a cloud of servers. So your data is probably in multiple places and you are isolated from a single server failing. Secondly, the fact that resources are spread across a cloud means you are better isolated from one user inadvertently doing something crazy and using up all the resources. And lastly, most cloud installations give you the option of increasing your capacity instantly. The cons? Firstly, you have no visibility of anything. In this respect, it's the same as the shared hosting. There is less likelihood that your website will slow down, but if it happens, you either have no information or just a couple of numbers like CPU usage. If you need to install something extra for a WordPress plugin, you still may not be allowed to. Ultimately, you're still using a big platform that is shared. And lastly, the hosting providers tend to greatly exaggerate how much power you are getting. Cloud hosting that costs $14 a month claims to have 4 CPUs and 4 gigabytes of RAM. This just isn't true, and when you chat to the web hosting support people, they can't tell you exactly what you're getting. I've tried 3 times. In part 2, click in the top right if available. If you'd like to be notified when videos are available, please click on my face in the bottom right and subscribe. In part 2, we're going to explore the final option, VPS, which is actually split into 3 sub-options, and I'll explain Lazy Cat Themes' 3 golden rules for choosing a web hosting provider.